A young black woman stood on a small stage, her voice filling the grand ballroom. She wore a simple, elegant black dress, nothing that screamed for attention. But her voice was a different story. It was rich and warm, a river of melody that wrapped around every guest, pulling them into the story of the song. She was, to anyone looking, just the hired help, a talented singer brought in to entertain at a fancy wedding. But she sang with a soulfulness that went beyond a simple performance. She was singing for someone she loved. Then the music was shattered. A flash of white silk and fury stormed toward the stage. It was the bride, Victoria Hale, her face a mask of rage. Her perfectly styled hair seemed to vibrate with her anger. She pointed a sharp, manicured finger at the singer. "Stop!" she shrieked, her voice thin and sharp, cutting through the warm melody. "Stop it right now! You are ruining my big day." A collective gasp went through the room. Forks clattered onto plates. Conversations died. Every eye turned to the bride, then to the singer. The singer, Danielle Carter, didn't yet know the bride's name, but she understood the look in her eyes. It was a look of pure, unearned disgust. No one in that room knew the truth. They didn't know that the woman in the simple black dress was not just a singer, but a millionaire recording artist. They didn't know that she wasn't just the help. She was the groom's beloved sister. By the end of this night, every jaw in this opulent hall would be on the floor. The bride would come to regret every single word she had just spat out. And everyone would learn a powerful lesson about who truly holds the power in any room. Before we find out what happens next, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And if this story already has you hooked, smash that like button so more people see it. The song died in Danielle's throat. The last note hung in the air for a moment, beautiful, and then broken, before it was swallowed by a thick, uncomfortable silence. The band behind her, a trio of seasoned musicians, let their instruments fall quiet. The drummer's hands hovered over his cymbals, frozen. The keyboardist lifted his fingers from the keys as if they were suddenly hot to the touch. The entire ballroom, a space designed for joy and celebration, was now a courtroom, and Danielle was on trial. Victoria stood before the stage, her chest heaving. The expensive lace on her gown seemed to tremble with her rage. "Did you hear me?" she demanded, her voice louder now, laced with a venom that made people flinch. "I said stop!" "What is this depressing noise? This is a wedding, not a funeral." Danielle simply looked at her. Her heart was beating a little faster, a steady thump, thump, thump against her ribs. But her face remained a mask of calm. She had faced down record executives, pushy journalists, and arenas filled with thousands of screaming fans. A spoiled bride was not going to break her. This quiet stillness seemed to infuriate Victoria even more. The bride wanted a reaction. She wanted tears, fear, a stammered apology. She was getting none of it. "Look at me when I'm talking to you," Victoria snapped. She took a step closer, her pristine white dress sweeping against the edge of the stage. She looked down her nose at Danielle, a gesture clearly meant to remind her of her place. "You're the help. You do what I say, and I say you're done." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Guests in expensive suits and elegant dresses exchanged shocked and uneasy glances. Was this part of some strange wedding gag? It couldn't be real. The bride wouldn't humiliate a performer like this in front of 200 people. But the fury on Victoria's face was very, very real. Her father, a stern-looking man with a neatly trimmed silver beard, watched from the head table. A faint, approving smirk played on his lips. He saw this not as a meltdown, but as his daughter taking charge. Victoria wasn't finished. She turned to the guests, throwing her arms out in a grand theatrical gesture. "Can you believe this?" she asked the room, her voice dripping with scorn. "We paid good money for a celebration, and we get this nobody, singing sad songs and bringing the mood down." She turned her glare back to Danielle. "My wedding day is the most important day of my life, and you are ruining it. You." Danielle remained silent. Her mind was a whirlwind, but her body was still. She thought of her brother, Michael, the groom. She could see him at the head table, his back ramrod straight, his smile gone. She had promised him she wouldn't cause a scene. She had promised to be the bigger person no matter what. So she held her tongue. She held the bride's gaze, her eyes clear and steady. There was no fear in them, there was no anger. There was just a quiet, profound disappointment. This calm defiance was like gasoline on Victoria's fire. "What? Are you deaf?" she sneered. "Get off the stage. Go wait in the kitchen with the rest of the staff. Your part of the evening is over." With that, Victoria spun around, her gown fanning out around her. She stalked back toward the head table, a triumphant little smile on her face. She believed she had won. She had silenced the sad music, put the hired help in her place, and reclaimed the spotlight for herself. The room remained in a state of stunned silence, the air thick with unspoken judgment. Danielle Carter, a woman who had sold out stadiums, stood on a small stage in a wedding hall, utterly, publicly, and cruelly dismissed. But as she watched the bride walk away, Danielle knew this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. Victoria didn't just want Danielle silent. She wanted her erased. She waved a dismissive hand at the band. "All of you pack it up. We'll use a playlist, something with a little life in it." Her voice was sharp, a commander barking orders at troops she held in contempt. The musicians, professionals who had been playing weddings for decades, exchanged looks of disbelief. They had seen bridezillas before, but this was a new level of ugly. The keyboardist slowly began to unplug his equipment, his movements stiff with offense. A few guests tried to break the tension with awkward forced laughter, as if witnessing a joke they didn't quite understand. Most, however, simply stared, their discomfort a palpable thing in the room. They shifted in their seats, adjusted their ties, and avoided making eye contact with anyone. The celebration had curdled. The joy had evaporated, replaced by a cold, shared embarrassment. Danielle carefully placed the microphone back in its stand. The small click as it settled into the cradle was the only sound in the vast, silent room. It felt as final as a gavel striking wood. She did not stumble, she did not rush. Every movement was deliberate, graceful, radiating a dignity that Victoria, in her $1,000 gown, could never hope to possess. She smoothed the front of her simple black dress and turned to the band. She gave them a small, apologetic nod, a silent message that said, "I'm sorry you were dragged into this." The drummer nodded back, his eyes full of respect. Then she walked to the edge of the stage. Victoria, now standing beside her father, watched with a smug sneer. This was exactly what she wanted. The hired help slinking away in defeat. As Danielle descended the small steps, Victoria couldn't resist one final poison jab. "See? That wasn't so hard," she said, her voice loud enough for the nearby tables to hear. "You people just don't belong at classy events like this." The words hung in the air, heavy and vile. You people. It wasn't just an insult to a singer. It was an insult coated in generations of prejudice, a verbal slap in the face that was meant to sting more than any physical blow. The air in the room seemed to get colder. Several jaws, which had been merely slack with surprise, now dropped in genuine shock. An elderly woman at a front table put a hand to her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. A young man sitting beside her shook his head slowly, muttering, "Unbelievable," under his breath. Danielle didn't react. She didn't flinch. She simply continued walking, her back straight, her head held high. She walked past the tables of stunned guests, her calm stride a silent rebuke to the bride's screeching tantrum. Her grace was a weapon, and it cut deeper than any shouted retort ever could. She wasn't running away, she was making a strategic retreat. Victoria saw that walk and mistook dignity for defeat. She let out a small, triumphant laugh and turned to her bridesmaids. "Finally," she said, fluffing her dress. "Now we can get this party started properly." She smirked, fully convinced that she had restored order. that she had won. But she was wrong. In her arrogance, she hadn't just insulted a singer. She had planted a seed of her own destruction. And in the fertile ground of her cruelty, that seed was already beginning to grow. She had no idea who she had just crossed. She had no idea that the silent woman walking away from the stage held the power to bring her entire world crashing down. The woman Victoria had just dismissed as a nobody was anything but. To understand the quiet power Danielle Carter held, you had to go back just a few months. You had to go to a state-of-the-art recording studio in Los Angeles, a place that smelled of old wood, new electronics, and creativity. There, Danielle wasn't just the help. She was the boss. She was the artist. She was the force that made producers and sound engineers hold their breath when she stepped up to the microphone. Danielle Carter, known professionally by her first name alone, was a rising star in the R&B world. Her last album had gone platinum. Her songs, filled with stories of love, heartbreak, and resilience, were streamed millions of times a day by people all over the globe. While she wasn't a paparazzi-hounded superstar, she was a quiet giant in the industry. She had earned a small fortune through her talent and her sharp business sense. She was a millionaire several times over. She owned a beautiful home in the Hollywood Hills, drove a car that was sleek and understated just like her, and commanded immense respect from her peers. But she never let the fame or the money change the core of who she was. She was still the girl from a modest background who had grown up singing in a church choir, the girl whose older brother Michael had worked 2 jobs to pay for her first vocal lessons. Her wealth was a tool, not an identity. Her fame was a platform, not a pedestal. When Michael had announced he was getting married, Danielle was thrilled for him. Michael was her rock, her biggest supporter. He was now a rising CEO in the tech world, a success in his own right. But to her, he was just Mikey, the big brother who had always protected her. When he asked her if she would sing at his wedding, she didn't hesitate for a second. "Of course, Mikey," she had told him over the phone. "I'd be honored." "You don't have to, Danny," he had insisted. "I know you're busy." "We can hire someone." "Don't be silly," she'd laughed. "I'm not hiring someone to sing at my own brother's wedding. It's my gift to you and Victoria." She had decided to perform without any fanfare. She didn't want to upstage the bride or make the day about her. She instructed the wedding planner to list her simply as the vocalist on the program. She chose a simple, elegant dress that wouldn't draw attention. She wanted to be just a singer for one night. A sister, giving a gift of music to her brother on the most important day of his life. So as she walked away from that stage, her calm wasn't weakness. It was the complete and total self-assurance of a person who knows their own worth. Victoria's insults were like pebbles thrown at a mountain. They might make a small noise, but they couldn't leave a dent. Danielle knew who she was. She knew her talent, she knew her success, and she knew that the truth was on her side. Revenge, she thought, doesn't always need to be loud and immediate. Sometimes the most devastating revenge is quiet. It is steady. It is the slow, inevitable tide of truth, coming in to wash away the castles of lies and arrogance that people build in the sand. Victoria had just built a very large castle, and the tide was coming. The morning of the wedding had been bright and filled with a nervous, happy energy. Before the ceremony, Michael had found Danielle in a small sitting room, away from the flurry of bridesmaids and florists. He was already in his tuxedo, looking handsome and anxious. He pulled his younger sister into a tight hug, his chin resting on the top of her head. "Thank you for being here, Danny," he had whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "It means the world to me." "Where else would I be?" she had replied, hugging him back just as tightly. "You're my big brother. I wouldn't miss this for anything." He pulled back, his hands on her shoulders, and looked her in the eyes. He had a serious expression on his face. "Listen," he said, his voice low. "Victoria's family, they can be a little much. They're very focused on status and appearances. I don't want you to feel uncomfortable." Danielle had given him a small, reassuring smile. "Mikey, I'll be fine. I'm just the singer tonight, remember? I'll be in the background. Michael shook his head. No, you're never in the background. I don't care how fancy this family thinks they are, or how much money her father has. You're the real star in our family. You're the one who built something incredible from nothing but your own voice and your own heart. Never forget that. I won't, she promised. And I promise to sing my heart out for you today. I know you will, he said, his eyes shining with pride. They have no idea. Now, standing in the back of the ballroom, watching the scene unfold, Danielle remembered that conversation. They have no idea. Michael's words echoed in her mind. He was right. Victoria and her family had no idea who they were dealing with. They saw a black woman in a simple dress and made 1,000 ugly assumptions. They saw her as less than them. From his seat at the head table, Michael watched his sister walk away, and a cold fury began to build in his chest. He saw the whole thing. He saw Victoria's face, twisted with an ugly sense of entitlement. He heard her words, the casual cruelty of calling Danielle, "you people." Every syllable was a betrayal. He had made excuses for Victoria for months. He had told himself her obsession with money and status was just a product of her upbringing. He had overlooked her snide remarks about his own family's humble beginnings. He had ignored the condescending way she spoke to waiters and valets. He had believed that deep down, she had a good heart. He was wrong. His jaw tightened so hard that a muscle jumped in his cheek. He had been a fool, a blind fool. He felt a surge of protective anger for his sister, the same feeling he used to get when they were kids and someone on the playground would try to bully her. He wanted to stand up right then and there. He wanted to grab the microphone and tell the entire room the truth. He wanted to end it, but he also trusted his sister. He knew her better than anyone. He knew her calm was not submission. It was strategy. He watched her retreat to a quiet corner of the room, and he knew he had to wait for her signal. He filed away the memory of his bride's sneer, the sound of her voice dripping with venom. He would not forget it. When the moment came, when Danielle gave him the nod, he would be ready. And when he finally spoke, everyone, especially Victoria, would listen. Emily Rogers was an expert at being invisible. As a waitress for a high-end catering company, her job was to move through lavish events like a ghost. She refilled champagne flutes, cleared away empty plates, and offered hors d'oeuvres with a polite, practiced smile. She was paid to be seen but not noticed, to anticipate needs without being intrusive. And from her invisible vantage point, she saw everything. She had been carrying a tray of sparkling champagne when the bride, Victoria, had begun her tirade. Emily froze near the edge of the room, the tray heavy in her hands, and watched the whole ugly scene unfold. Every word Victoria spat felt like a personal blow. Emily had been on the receiving end of that same condescending tone 100 times. The dismissive wave of a hand, the snap of the fingers to get her attention, the unspoken message, "You are beneath me. You are the help." She felt a hot knot of anger and empathy tighten in her stomach. The singer, Danielle, was handling it with a grace Emily could only dream of. She hadn't cried or shouted back. She had just stood there, absorbing the hate with a quiet strength that was breathtaking. When Victoria uttered the words, "you people," Emily flinched as if she'd been struck. She knew exactly what that phrase meant. It was a verbal wall, built to separate us from them. After Danielle walked off the stage, she found a quiet, dimly lit corner near the service entrance, intending to just breathe for a moment and collect her thoughts. Emily saw her there, standing alone, a solitary figure of dignity amidst the chaos. On impulse, Emily changed her course. She walked over to Danielle, her tray of champagne glasses clinking softly. "Excuse me, miss," Emily said, her voice a low whisper. Danielle turned, her expression calm, but her eyes holding a deep well of emotion. "Yes? I wanted to say, I saw what happened," Emily said, her words coming out in a rush. "And you didn't deserve any of that. It was horrible." She felt her cheeks flush, worried she was overstepping her bounds. But she had to say something. The injustice of it was burning a hole in her. A small, genuine smile touched Danielle's lips. It was the first one Emily had seen on her face. It was a smile of gratitude, of recognition. "Thank you," Danielle said, her voice soft but clear. "That means a lot." "Her," Emily said, nodding her head in the direction of the head table where Victoria was now laughing loudly with her bridesmaids. "She's like that with all of us. Thinks because she's wearing a white dress and her daddy's paying the bill, she can treat people like dirt." Emily hadn't meant to say so much, but it just came pouring out. She felt a kinship with this stranger, a shared experience of being looked down upon. Danielle simply nodded, her eyes thoughtful. People like that always show their true colors eventually. "Well, I hope everyone here saw them tonight," Emily whispered fiercely. She held out the tray. "Champagne?" Danielle's smile widened slightly. "No, thank you. But thank you for this. For your kindness." "Of course," Emily said, feeling a little braver. She gave Danielle a small conspiratorial nod and then melted back into the crowd, resuming her role as the invisible waitress. But something had shifted. She was no longer just a neutral observer. She was on Danielle's side. She was a witness. And she knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that this night was far from over. The moral compass of the room had found its true north, and it was pointing directly at the quiet woman in the corner. Flushed with the high of her public victory, Victoria preened at the head table. She felt powerful, in control. She had faced a challenge to her perfect day, and had crushed it. She leaned over to her maid of honor, a woman with an equally smug expression. "Did you see that?" Victoria whispered, though her whisper carried to half the table. "Did you see how I shut her down?" She just stood there and took it. "You were amazing, Vicky," the bridesmaid cooed, touching up her lipstick. "You totally saved the party." Her voice was so depressing Victoria took a long sip of her expensive champagne, the bubbles tickling her nose. She laughed, a sound that was sharp and brittle. "Seriously, my wedding is not going to be ruined by some janitor singer they probably found on the internet. I told Michael I wanted the best, but he's so sentimental about things." She rolled her eyes, a gesture of casual disrespect toward her new husband, who was sitting just a few feet away, silent and rigid. Her father, Mr. Hale, who was seated on her other side, leaned in. He patted her hand, his expression one of proud approval. "That's my girl," he murmured, his voice a low rumble of privilege. "Never let anyone walk all over you. Especially not the staff. You have to show them who's in charge from the very beginning." "Exactly, Daddy," Victoria said, beaming at his validation. But beyond their little bubble of arrogance, the atmosphere in the ballroom had grown thick and sour. The whispers were no longer about the beautiful flowers or the delicious food. Now they were about the bride. "Can you believe her?" a woman at a nearby table murmured to her husband, hiding her mouth behind a napkin. "To speak to someone like that, in front of everyone." "That was one of the ugliest things I've ever seen at a wedding," her husband whispered back, shaking his head. Across the room, a group of Michael's friends from his tech company were looking at the head table with open disapproval. "I don't know how Michael puts up with her," one of them said. "She's always been like this. She treats everyone like they're beneath her." Victoria was oblivious to it all. Wrapped in her cocoon of entitlement, she couldn't feel the shift in the room. She couldn't sense the judgment in the hundreds of eyes that were now watching her. She felt only triumph. Her arrogance, now unchecked, began to spiral. She started complaining loudly about the flowers, then the temperature of the wine, finding fault in everything. Then came her most fatal mistake. While Michael was briefly turned away, talking to his best man, Victoria leaned toward her bridesmaids again. "Honestly," she said with a conspiratorial giggle, "he's lucky to have me. My family's connections are going to do wonders for his little company." Without my family's money, he's nothing." She didn't know that Michael's best man had heard every word. She didn't know that the fragile respect the guests had for her was crumbling into dust. With every boastful word, every cruel laugh, she was digging her own grave. She thought she was cementing her power, but she was only revealing her profound weakness. She was showing everyone exactly who she was. A petty tyrant, a spoiled child in a wedding dress. And the seeds of her ruin, watered by her own arrogance, were growing faster and deeper with every passing minute. Michael sat at the head table like a statue carved from ice. On the outside, he was still, his hands resting on the crisp white tablecloth. But on the inside, a storm was raging. He watched his new wife, Victoria, laughing and bragging with her friends. He saw the smug satisfaction on her face, the casual cruelty in her eyes as she glanced around the room. And with every passing second, his love for her, once a bright and steady flame, was flickering and dying, turning to ash. His mind replayed the scene at the stage over and over, the shock on his sister's face quickly masked by her incredible composure, the venom in Victoria's voice, the awful, loaded phrase, "You people." How had he not seen this side of her before? But he had. That was the truth that was settling in his gut like a cold, heavy stone. He had seen it. He had just chosen to ignore it. He remembered a dinner a few months ago when Victoria had been rude to a waitress, snapping her fingers and complaining about the service until the poor girl was on the verge of tears. Michael had been embarrassed, but Victoria had just laughed it off, saying, "You have to be firm with them or they take advantage." He had let it go. He remembered a conversation about his own family. Victoria had referred to his parents' home as quaint and humble, with a tone that made it clear she meant small and poor. She had made subtle, condescending remarks about his background, always framed as jokes. He had told himself she didn't mean it, that she was just from a different world. He had made excuses. He had defended her to his friends and even to himself. He looked over at Danielle, who was now standing near the back wall, talking quietly with a waitress. She looked so poised, so dignified. She was everything Victoria was not. Kind, humble, and strong in a way that didn't require putting others down. He felt a wave of shame wash over him. He had brought his sister into this situation. He had exposed her to this ugliness. He was the groom. He was her brother. He should have protected her. His anger simmered, a low boil just beneath the surface. He was ready to erupt. He was ready to stand up and end this charade right now. Just as he was about to push his chair back, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out under the table, his movements stiff. It was a text message from Danielle. He opened it. The message was short, just a few words, but they landed with the force of a command. "Don't fight yet." "Let her show everyone who she really is," Michael took a deep, shuddering breath. He read the message again. Danielle was right. Of course, she was right. An immediate confrontation would just be a messy, he said, she said argument. Victoria would play the victim, the hysterical bride whose day was being ruined. But if he waited, if he let Victoria continue to display her true character, there would be no doubt. No one would be able to defend her. It was a trap. A quiet, elegant trap. And Victoria was walking right into it, completely unaware. Michael put his phone back in his pocket. He settled back into his chair, his posture still rigid, but his purpose was now clear. He would wait, he would watch, and he would let his bride hang herself with her own words. The storm inside him quieted, replaced by a cold, sharp-edged resolve. The time for anger would come later. For now, it was time for patience. Danielle watched the room from her quiet corner. She saw the whispers, the uncomfortable glances, the way people were looking at Victoria with a mixture of shock and disgust. She saw her brother Michael sitting at the head table, a thundercloud of fury gathering on his face. She knew he was a breath away from exploding, and that's why she had sent the text. An emotional outburst wasn't the answer. Justice needed to be deliberate. It needed to be undeniable. She excused herself from her brief, kind conversation with Emily, the waitress, and slipped out of the ballroom into the relative quiet of the hotel hallway. The plush carpet absorbed the sound of her footsteps. The distant, muffled beat of the new, generic pop music Victoria had demanded was a faint throb through the walls. She pulled out her phone. Her hands were perfectly steady. There was no tremor of anger or fear. There was only a calm, focused clarity. She was no longer just a sister who had been insulted. She was a professional, a businesswoman, and her brand, which was built on authenticity and grace, had been publicly attacked. She scrolled through her contacts and found the name, Leo-Manager. She pressed the call button. He picked up on the second ring. "Danny? Is everything okay?" Leo's voice was sharp with concern. "My phone has been blowing up for the last 10 minutes. People are sending me videos from the wedding. What the hell is going on? Who is this woman?" Danielle took a slow breath. "It's exactly what it looks like, Leo." The bride had a bit of a meltdown. "A bit of a meltdown?" Leo's voice was incredulous. "Danny, she publicly humiliated you. She was racist. This is a PR nightmare. Or a PR goldmine, depending on how we play it." "I'm going to play it my way," Danielle said, her voice even and cool. "I need you to do something for me." I saw at least a dozen people recording my performance before she interrupted. One of them was a friend of Michael's, Sarah Jenkins. I know she got a good, clear video. She just sent it to me. "Okay. You want me to send it to the legal team? We can sue for slander, defamation." "No," Danielle cut him off, her tone leaving no room for argument. "No lawyers." "Not yet. I want you to upload the video, the full performance, right up until the moment she starts shouting." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Leo was processing it. "You want to post it now?" "Yes," Danielle confirmed. "Post it to my official Instagram, my YouTube channel, everywhere. No angry caption, no explanation, just a simple title. A song for my brother. Let the performance speak for itself, and let the interruption speak for itself too. The internet can be the judge and jury." Leo was silent for another moment, and then a slow whistle came through the phone. "Wow, that's brilliant. It's clean. You're not stooping to her level. You're just showing the truth." "Exactly," Danielle said. "Let the world see the performance. Let them see what she called noise. And let them see her for who she is." "Consider it done, boss," Leo said, a new energy in his voice. "It'll be live in 5 minutes. "Thank you, Leo," Danielle said. She hung up the phone, her decision made. This wasn't an act of revenge. It was an act of revelation. Victoria wanted the spotlight, and Danielle was about to give it to her. A spotlight brighter and more unforgiving than she could ever imagine. Soon, millions of people would be watching, and the truth, once released, could not be taken back. Back inside the grand ballroom, a subtle but undeniable shift was taking place. The forced, upbeat pop music playing from the speakers felt jarringly out of place with the tense, awkward energy in the room. The initial shock of Victoria's outburst had faded, replaced by something else, a low, persistent buzz. It was the sound of discovery. It started at a table near the back. A young woman, a guest of the Groom, had been scrolling through her phone, trying to distract herself from the uncomfortable atmosphere. Suddenly, her eyes widened. She gasped and grabbed the arm of the man sitting next to her. "Oh my God," she whispered, her voice filled with disbelief. "Look, you have to look at this." She held out her phone. On the screen was an artist profile from a popular music streaming app, and the photo on the profile was unmistakably the singer who had just been humiliated. The name at the top read Danielle Carter. "Wait a second," the man said, leaning in for a closer look. "Danielle Carter? As in the Danielle Carter? The one with that song that was everywhere last year?" He pulled out his own phone, his fingers flying across the screen. "No way. It can't be." But it was. A quick search confirmed it. The quiet woman in the simple black dress was not just some random wedding singer. She was a legitimate famous artist. A star. The revelation spread through the room like a spark catching on dry grass. One person would gasp, then show their phone to their neighbor. That neighbor would then pull out their own phone, their eyes wide with astonishment. The quiet murmuring grew louder. "Isn't that? It is! It's her! I knew I recognized her voice!" I couldn't place it. Why is Danielle Carter singing at this wedding? And why did that bride treat her like that? Phones began to buzz and chime all at once. Instagram notifications lit up screens across the room. Leo, Danielle's manager, had worked fast. The video was live. The title was simple and elegant. A song for my brother. The video showed Danielle on stage, bathed in soft light, her voice soaring through the room with passion and grace. It was a stunning performance, raw and beautiful. And then, just as the song reached its emotional peak, the video cut off. It didn't show Victoria's attack. It didn't need to. The performance alone was a stark, undeniable contradiction to the bride's claim that she was ruining the day with noise. Victoria, still holding court at the head table, noticed the shift. She saw that people were no longer looking at her. They were all staring at their glowing screens, whispering to each other with animated, shocked expressions. She felt a prickle of annoyance. "What is so interesting on their phones?" she complained to her father. "It's rude." "Don't they know they're at my wedding?" Mr. Hale shrugged, taking a sip of his wine. "It's the younger generation. No attention span." Victoria waved off her concern, still wrapped in her bubble of self-importance. She assumed it was just some fleeting social media trend, some silly video that had captured the attention of her guests. She had no idea that she was the subject of their frantic whispers. She had no idea that her world was being fundamentally reordered right under her nose. The trap, which had been set so quietly, was now closing. The power dynamic in the room had already shifted. She just hadn't realized it yet. She was no longer the queen in her castle. She was the fool on the stage, and the curtain was about to rise. The generic pop music, which had been providing a flimsy layer of normalcy over the tense room, suddenly cut out. The abrupt silence was deafening. Every head in the ballroom snapped toward the head table. Michael Carter was on his feet. He hadn't stood up quickly or aggressively. He had risen with a slow, deliberate motion that commanded attention more effectively than any shout. He held a microphone in his hand, taken from the DJ booth. He stood there for a long moment, his eyes sweeping across the room, letting the silence stretch, letting the anticipation build. He looked at the faces of his guests, at his friends, and finally, his gaze landed on his bride, Victoria. Her smile faltered, replaced by a look of confused irritation. "Michael, what are you doing?" she hissed. "It's not time for speeches." He ignored her. His voice, when he finally spoke, was not loud. It was calm, steady, and carried the weight of absolute authority. It was a voice that cut through the tension like a surgeon's scalpel. "Enough," he said. The single word silenced the last of the whispers. The room was now so quiet you could hear the hum of the air conditioning. Michael's eyes were locked on Victoria, but he spoke to the entire room. "We're here to celebrate a union, a partnership, a family. And family's about respect." He let that word hang in the air. "It's about honoring the people you love. It's about protecting them." He paused, and his gaze shifted for a moment, finding his sister Danielle, who was now standing near the entrance of the ballroom. She gave him the slightest of nods. It was the signal he had been waiting for. He turned his attention back to Victoria. Her face was a canvas of confusion and dawning dread. She was starting to realize this was not a loving toast. "A little while ago," Michael continued, his voice as sharp and cold as steel, "my bride took it upon herself to dismiss our musical guest. She called her a nobody. She called her performance noise. She told her that she was ruining the day. He repeated Victoria's words, each one a hammer blow. Victoria's face began to drain of color. "Michael, stop," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "What are you doing?" He did not stop. He took a step away from the table toward the center of the room, making it clear that he was separating himself from her. "I need to make a clarification. I need to introduce you all to our singer properly." He looked directly at Victoria, and his next words were delivered with a chilling precision. "That singer, the one you humiliated in front of all our friends and family, the woman you called the help." He let the suspense build until it was almost unbearable. Guests were leaning forward in their seats, their mouths agape. "That's my sister!" A massive collective gasp swept through the ballroom. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated shock. 200 people, all realizing the truth at the same moment. Jaws literally dropped. An elderly aunt of Victoria's pressed a hand to her chest as if to keep her heart from leaping out. "That's my sister," Michael repeated, his voice ringing with pride and fury. "My blood. Danielle Carter, the most talented, graceful, and brilliant woman I have ever known." As he said her name, Danielle began to walk from the back of the room. She didn't walk like the hired help slinking back to the stage. She walked with the poise and confidence of a queen returning to her throne. Every eye was on her. The whispers turned into a roar of recognition and astonishment. Victoria's face, which had been pale, now turned a ghastly shade of white. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She looked from Danielle to Michael and back again, her mind struggling to process the catastrophic reality that was crashing down upon her. The trap had been sprung. The world seemed to slow down for Victoria. The gasps of the guests, the relentless stare of her new husband, the confident stride of the woman she had just scorned. It all blurred into a nightmarish collage. Her mind was a frantic mess trying to connect the dots. The singer, Danielle Carter, Michael's sister. It was impossible. Michael's sister she didn't even know what his sister did. He had told her his sister was in the music business, but she had pictured someone who worked in an office. An assistant, maybe. She had never bothered to ask more. She had never cared. Michael walked to the small stage and picked up the microphone that Danielle had so gracefully set down earlier. He turned to face the stunned crowd. "I had one request for my wedding," he said, his voice resonating with a power no one had ever heard from him before. "I asked my incredibly busy, incredibly successful sister if she would honor us by sharing her gift. Not as a world-famous recording artist, but as my sister, as a member of our family." He then turned and held out his hand to Danielle, who had reached the stage. She took his hand and he helped her up the single step. The two of them stood there side by side, a united front of loyalty and strength. The resemblance between them, now that everyone was looking for it, was undeniable. They had the same kind eyes, the same determined set to their jaws. "I would like to reintroduce my heart, my family, and my personal hero," Michael announced, his voice filled with a love and pride that was a stark contrast to the venom Victoria had spewed. "My sister, Danielle Carter." A wave of applause erupted through the ballroom. It started with a few of Michael's friends, then spread rapidly. It wasn't polite, obligatory applause. It was a roar of approval, of support, of admiration. Guests rose to their feet, their faces a mixture of awe and outrage on Danielle's behalf. Phones, which had been hidden under tables, were now held up high, their small lights dotting the room as dozens of people started recording this incredible turn of events. Danielle picked up the microphone. She looked out at the sea of faces, and then her eyes found Victoria. The bride was still frozen at the head table, her expression a grotesque mask of horror and disbelief. Her arrogant smirk had completely evaporated, replaced by the slack-jawed terror of someone who has just realized they've made a fatal, life-altering mistake. Her father missed her. Hale, who had been so smug just moments before, now looked deeply uncomfortable. He stared down at his plate, refusing to meet anyone's gaze. His daughter's humiliation was now his own. My brother asked me to sing a song that meant a lot to us growing up, Danielle said, her voice as smooth and clear as a bell. It held no trace of anger, no hint of triumph. There was only a pure, profound soulfulness. I'd like to finish it for him. She nodded to the band, who had retaken their places on stage with renewed energy. The keyboardist began to play, and the rich, warm chords filled the hall once more. And then Danielle began to sing. Her voice was stronger now, more powerful, infused with all the emotion of the night. She wasn't just performing anymore. She was testifying. Every note was a testament to her strength, every lyric a declaration of her worth. The room was utterly captivated, held in a spell of music and raw emotion. Victoria Hale had tried to silence her. But in the end, all she had done was give Danielle a bigger stage and a much, much larger audience. The final note of the song hung in the air, perfect and pure, before the room exploded into a thunderous standing ovation. The applause was a verdict. It was a judgment passed down by every single person in the room. They weren't just clapping for the beautiful music. They were clapping for Danielle's dignity. They were cheering for the powerful public restoration of justice. Danielle bowed her head gracefully, a humble smile on her face. Michael put a protective arm around her shoulder, squeezing it tightly. Then he stepped back to the microphone, and the applause slowly died down as people waited for what he would say next. He looked once more at Victoria, who was now trembling, her face ashen. She looked like a ghost at her own wedding feast. Michael's voice was quiet, but it carried the chilling finality of a judge delivering a sentence. "Victoria," he said, his use of her full name creating a stark, formal distance between them. "I told you that family is about respect. You have shown me tonight that you have no respect for my family. You have shown me your true character." Gasps, louder this time, rippled through the hall. This was no longer just a correction. This was a reckoning. "A marriage cannot be built on a foundation of cruelty and disrespect," Michael continued, his voice unwavering. He took a slow, deliberate breath. "And so I cannot marry you. If you cannot respect my family, you will never be my wife." The declaration was a shockwave. A woman screamed. Someone else dropped a glass, the sound of it shattering on the floor echoing the shattering of Victoria's life. The wedding was over. It had been officially and publicly terminated by the groom. Victoria was left speechless, frozen in her chair. The color had completely drained from her face, leaving her looking pale and ill beneath her expensive makeup. Her dream day, the one she had obsessed over for months, the one she had tried to protect with such viciousness, had just been utterly and completely destroyed. And she had no one to blame but herself. The guests who had been recording the performance now turned their phones toward the head table, capturing Victoria's humiliation in high definition. She was a statue of shame, a monument to her own arrogance. In that moment, Emily, the waitress, walked past the head table. She was carrying a tray with a single glass of ice water. She walked directly to the stage, bypassing Victoria completely. She offered the glass to Danielle with a warm, genuine smile. "You were incredible," she whispered. Danielle took the glass, her eyes shining with gratitude. "Thank you, Emily." The simple act was a powerful symbol. The respect in the room had been completely inverted. The person who was supposed to be invisible was now being honored, while the bride, the supposed center of the universe, had become a pariah. Mr. Hale, finally snapping out of his stupor, stood up. He grabbed his daughter's arm, his face a mask of grim fury and embarrassment. "Come on," he hissed, pulling her to her feet. "We're leaving." Victoria stumbled after him, a puppet with its strings cut. Two of her bridesmaids rushed to her side, shielding her from the prying eyes and cameras as they escorted her out of the ballroom, her wedding day in ruins, her future in tatters. The room erupted in a buzz of conversation, but no one was celebrating a wedding anymore. They were celebrating the fall of a tyrant and the rise of a queen who had never needed a crown. The fallout was not just swift. It was global. By the next morning, the story was everywhere. The videos shot by the wedding guests had spread like wildfire across every social media platform. The hashtag Wedding Singer Sister was trending worldwide. News outlets, blogs, and entertainment shows picked up the story. They pieced it together. The bride's vicious meltdown, the groom's stunning reveal, and Danielle's powerful, triumphant final performance. The video Danielle's manager had posted, "A Song for My Brother," had millions of views overnight. The comments section was a flood of support for Danielle and universal condemnation for Victoria. Headlines screamed the story in bold letters. "Bride humiliates hired help, discovers its groom's millionaire sister." Another read, "The millionaire singer who kept her dignity in the face of hate." Danielle was lauded as a hero, a symbol of grace under pressure. Her music sales surged. Old songs climbed back up the charts as a new wave of fans discovered her work, drawn in not just by her talent, but by her character. Victoria, on the other hand, became infamous. She was transformed overnight from an unknown socialite into a public symbol of entitlement and prejudice. The internet nicknamed her Victoria the Vile. Her social media accounts were flooded with so much hate that she was forced to delete them. The high-end event planning company she worked for, which catered to the city's elite, fired her in a public statement, citing that her actions did not align with their company's values of respect and inclusivity. Her father's business partners began to distance themselves. Her reputation, the thing she had valued above all else, was not just damaged. It was shredded beyond repair. But the consequences of that night were not all negative. Justice, it turned out, was not just about punishing the wicked. It was also about rewarding the good. A few days later, Emily the waitress was at home studying for a college exam she could barely afford to take. Her phone buzzed with a notification. It was a direct message on Instagram from an account with a blue check mark next to it. It was from Danielle Carter. Emily's heart leaped into her throat as she opened it. The message was simple. "Emily, I will never forget your kindness on what was a very difficult night. You showed me compassion when you had no reason to. I looked up the tuition for your nursing program. It's been taken care of. Focus on your studies. The world needs more people like you. Danielle." Emily stared at the message, her eyes filling with tears. She reread it 3, 4, 5 times, unable to believe it was real. She logged into her university's student portal, her hands shaking. And there it was. Her balance, 0, paid in full. An anonymous donation had covered the entire cost of her degree. The kindness she had shown, a simple act of human decency, had come back to her in a way that would change her life forever. Justice wasn't just poetic. It was transformative. The morning after the disastrous wedding, the sun rose on a world that felt different. Michael and Danielle sat across from each other at a small, quiet cafe far from the hotel. The air between them was calm, the storm having finally passed. They sipped their coffee, the silence comfortable, the bond between them stronger than ever. "Are you okay?" Danielle asked, her voice soft. Michael looked up from his cup, a wry, tired smile on his face. "I think I should be asking you that." "I'm fine, Mikey." "Really," she said. "I've dealt with worse than a spoiled brat with a microphone." He shook his head, a wave of guilt washing over his face. "I'm so sorry, Danny. I should have seen who she was. I should have protected you. You did protect me," she insisted, reaching across the table to put her hand on his. "You stood up for me. You stood up for our family. That's all that matters. You did the right thing, the hard thing, but the right thing." Michael let out a long breath he felt like he had been holding for months. "It doesn't feel real. A day ago, I was about to get married." "And now you're free," Danielle said gently. "You're free from someone who never truly saw you." She didn't love you, Michael. She loved the idea of you. She loved the status she thought you could give her, especially when combined with her father's money. He knew she was right. The painful truth was settling in, and with it came a sense of profound relief. He had dodged a bullet, a beautifully dressed, gold-plated bullet that would have slowly poisoned his life. "The right woman," Danielle continued, her eyes full of love for her brother, "will love you for your brilliant mind and your kind heart. She'll love our family. With all of our loud, crazy, humble history, she will love you, Michael, not your status." The lesson hung in the air between them, clear and undeniable. It was a lesson about value, about what truly matters in life. A few weeks later, another piece of the new beginning fell into place. Emily received a formal email. It was an offer for a paid internship at Danielle Carter's record label, working in the artist relations department. The email stated that they were looking for people with a high degree of empathy and integrity. Danielle had not just paid for her education, she was giving her a path, a future. Emily accepted the position without a moment's hesitation, her life now aimed in a direction she had never dreamed possible. The scales of justice had been balanced, respect had been restored, and for those who deserved it, a new and better chapter was just beginning. In the end, the story of that night became more than just a viral moment. It became a parable for the modern age. It taught a lesson that echoed far beyond the walls of that opulent ballroom. Status, the kind that truly matters, is not revealed by the price of a wedding gown or the balance in a bank account. It is revealed in moments of pressure. It is shown in how we treat those we believe have nothing to offer us. True power does not need to shout. It does not need to belittle others to feel tall. It does not need to humiliate the help to prove its own importance. True bosses, the real giants of character and spirit, stand calm in the face of ugliness. They hold their ground with a quiet dignity. They know their own worth so completely that the insults of the arrogant and the insecure are nothing more than meaningless noise. They stand calm, and they let arrogance become its own bonfire. They let entitlement be the architect of its own downfall. Victoria, with her sharp words and cruel laughter, faded into an echo of shame, a cautionary tale whispered on the internet. But Danielle, smiling in the recording studio, her voice a gift she shared with the world, remained. Her light wasn't diminished by the darkness she encountered. It only seemed to shine brighter. If this story about dignity and justice moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring stories like this one. What would you have done in this situation? Let us know below.